Hello and welcome. My name is Tania Haddad. I'm the Director of the Global Engagement Initiative at the American University of Beirut and the Professor of Public Affairs. I'm honored to present today's panel's discussion, What does a Trump presidency mean for U.S. foreign policy towards the Middle East? This event is part of the Conversations from Beirut series. The series is jointly organized by the Faculty of Arts and Science at the American University of Beirut and the Mamdouha Bobst Center for Peace and Justice at Princeton University through their ongoing Bobst AUB collaborative initiative. This event is also in partnership with the Global Engagement Initiative at the American University of Beirut. The Global Engagement Initiative is dedicated to fostering global knowledge and partnership, aligning with AUB's mission of advancing impactful conversations on pressing global and regional issues. Today's discussion will explore the implications of U.S. foreign policy under the Trump's presidency, with a focus on its impact on the Middle East. We are privileged to have two distinguished panelists today with us. Dr. Paul Salem. Dr. Salem is the Vice President for International Engagement of the Middle East Institute. He served previously as MEI's President and CEO. He is currently based in the Middle East and works on building partnerships throughout the region. His research focuses on issues of political change, transition, and conflict, as well as the regional and international relations of the Middle East. He is the author and editor of a number of books, including Escaping the Conflict Trap, Toward Ending Civil Wars in the Middle East with Ross Harrison, and Winning the Battle, Losing the War, Addressing the Conditions that Fuel Armed Non-State Actors with Charles Lister. Prior to joining MEI, Dr. Salem was the founding director of the Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut, the director of the Faris Foundation, and he also founded and directed the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies. Dr. Maha Yahya. Dr. Yahya is the director of the Carnegie Middle East Center. Dr. Yahya's expertise includes geopolitical shifts, political violence, governance, socioeconomic challenges, and inequality. She has consulted with international organizations such as the United Nations and the World Bank, and has worked across countries including Lebanon, Pakistan, Oman, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Dr. Yahya is the author of many publications, including Israel Next Front, Iran, Hezbollah, and the Coming War in Lebanon, and the Middle East is on the brink again, the risks of an unstable authoritarian order. Moderating this critical conversation is Dr. Amaney Jamal. Dr. Jamal is the Dean of the Princeton School of Public Administration and International Affairs. She is the Edward S. Sanford Professor of Politics and the Professor of Politics and International Affairs at Princeton. She directs the workshop on Arab political development and the Bobst American University of Beirut Collaborative Initiative. She is also the co-founder and co-principal investigator of the Arab Barometer Project. Dr. Jamal's scholarship covers the Middle East and North Africa, mass and political behavior, political development and democratization, inequality and economic segregation, Muslim immigration, gender, race, religion, and class. She has authored several books and articles. Her book, Barriers to Democracy, won the 2008 American Political Science Best Book Award in the Comparative Democratization section. She is working on a new book titled The Global Segregation of the Poor. Thank you for joining us today for what promises to be a rich and insightful discussion. We look forward to your engagement and the perspectives our panelists will share. I now hand it over to Dr. Jamal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haddad, for that wonderful introduction. I want to welcome all our viewers and want to thank everybody for helping us organize this webinar, including Lara, Christy, Nisreen, Miranda, and Amanda. Thank you for all your efforts. I'm very, very delighted today because I have two of the most prominent experts on the Middle East with us today, Paul and Maha. Amazing colleagues, amazing experts. So this is going to be a very rich and nuanced discussion. So I'm thrilled about that. In the last several weeks, we've seen several new developments in the Middle East. First of all, we saw a ceasefire emerge between Hezbollah and Israel. Then we had the fall of the Syrian Assad regime and the rise of Julani in Syria. Then we've seen new leadership emerge in Lebanon. We've also seen in more recent days, and thankfully, a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. We've seen the first hostages released, the first Palestinians who've been detained have been released. The road is very long ahead in terms of the reconstruction of Gaza. So with all that's going on in the region, we also have a new president. And so we have a lot of questions about what's coming down the pipeline in the next several weeks, but also several years. So with that, I think I'm just going to start with Paul and Maha. Like, what does a Trump presidency mean for the region, especially as we think about the future of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? In other words, will this be a president that will sort of capitalize on the gains of the ceasefire and try to push a two-state solution forward? What about Lebanon, given what's going on in Lebanon, especially with Hezbollah? And we know that this President Trump is dedicated and committed to a normalization treaty between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That's a lot, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Paul.
Well, thank you, Amaney, and thank you, Tania. It's a pleasure to be in an event with AUB where I studied and I taught. I did not go to Princeton, but privileged to do anything with Princeton. Great to be with my colleague Maha. Well, let me just start by saying, I mean, a number of things. There are some things about Trump that are predictable, and there's a lot that is unpredictable. What is somewhat, predictable is that this is not the first time he's president. This is his second presidency, so we have a bit of a track record. We know what a lot of his basic positions on some of the Middle East issues are. The unpredictable elements are more than the predictable ones. The unpredictable ones, one, he himself is a very unpredictable character, and he prides himself on being unpredictable. Secondly, the team that he has assembled is a very varied team. There are some members of his team that are very ideological, either evangelical Zionist or sort of more mainstream. There's a very strong ideological, very pro-Israeli, anti-Iranian, very strong ideological group. Then there are a few more traditional Republican conservatives, like the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, more traditional kind of Republican position. And then you have people like J.D. Vance and a number in the Republican Party, which are really isolationist and that really don't want to do anything very far from American borders or spend money in Ukraine or Israel or anywhere else. So the team itself is also varied and hence adds unpredictability. And then the final factor is that the Middle East is a very different Middle East today than the Middle East he came into in 2017 when he first was president. And obviously, as you're indicating, we're a year and 2 or 3 months into the longest Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Lebanese, Israeli-Iranian, whatever you want to call it, a very long war. Having said that, let me just shoot out a few, ideas and positions. One, on Israel, Trump is very pro-Israeli. He's very pro-right-wing Israeli. He is, as we've seen in his own positions about Panama and Greenland and Canada, he has no problem with annexation, with countries changing their borders. He was on the verge of supporting Israel's annexation of their settlements on the West Bank during his first term, before the UAE proposed the Abraham Accords, basically. So definitely he's going to be very supportive of a very right-wing Israeli agenda. The contradiction then is a couple of things. One is that he does not, at the same time, he has been very clear that he doesn't want war, that certainly he doesn't want wars to be ongoing when he took office. Right. The fact that that position is very clear is the reason, largely, that Israel accepted a ceasefire in Lebanon, and then Israel, in the last couple of days, accepted a ceasefire in Gaza. They were afraid of Trump. Netanyahu is afraid of Trump. And the fact that Trump does not want wars will affect and complicate his decisions, on Palestine, and maybe we'll get to it on Iran. And that's linked to another position, is that Trump and Netanyahu do not get along very well. And they are both alpha males, not to say bullies. And it's very clear that Netanyahu basically directed U.S. Middle East policy under Biden. and Biden found himself having to go along with every step in Gaza, every step in Lebanon, until Trump won the election, when things began to change. That will not happen under Trump. For better or for worse, Trump has a very forceful character. Netanyahu is very aware of that, and that will complicate the relationship with Netanyahu or Netanyahu's government. Finally, on the Israel issue is something you mentioned, Amaney, that Trump has a deep interest, in having excellent relations with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. He's a businessman. He cares most about economics and energy and technology and the future of growth and so on, and that's all in the Gulf. And he wants to make progress on that deal between the US and Saudi Arabia, which, if it's going to be a treaty, will require normalization with Israel. And that will put Trump in a difficult position, because Saudi Arabia has been very clear that they will not sign anything unless there is serious movement on Gaza and serious movement towards some kind of Palestinian state. So that will put Trump in a contradictory position. I'll end with a few comments on Iran. Again, similar contradictions. Trump is very hardline on Iran. Certainly his team is very hardline on Iran. However, his objective with Iran is a deal. He has said many times he wants to make the best deal. He wants a Trump deal with Iran. He wants to make Iran great again. He wants to lift sanctions, but the conditions would have to be very steep that he would put on the Iranians. The contradiction also there is that Israel and Iran now, there's a tremendous imbalance of power, and Israel and many in the incoming Trump administration want to hit Iran militarily in order to take advantage of that great imbalance. And Trump might share some of that sentiment, but Trump does not want war. And Trump does not want a risk of that impacting the energy markets and having a rise in gas prices in the US on his watch, and inflation. So how Trump deals with the contradiction on Iran and how he deals with the contradictions in Israel is something we're going to have to watch closely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that. Maha, just to build off what Paul's been saying, on the Iran front, as Middle East people who work on the Middle East like ourselves, we're hearing a lot of different conflicting narratives. So one narrative goes that Trump, to Paul's point, Trump is not interested in war, and he's the deal maker. If he can come out of this with a deal with Iran, and strategically speaking, Iran is now weak. So this is probably the ideal time to strike a deal with Iran. How would this bode for the American alliance with Israel and with the Gulf, with the Saudis, especially amidst this normalization? And then also, sorry, I want to make sure that you also get to talk about what Trump means for these regional developments and conflicts in the region. Oh, I think you're muted, Maha. Sorry.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, thank you very much, Amaney, and thank you, Tania, UB and Princeton, for inviting me to this discussion, and of course to my colleague Paul. Just very quickly to build on what Paul said, I mean, he pretty much covered a lot of it, but just to mention a couple of things. I think President Trump is going to be between two opposing, if you like, tendencies. One is he is very interested, as he put it, to win the Nobel Prize. So he will want to, for peace. So he will want to be the person who brought peace to the Middle East. And yet at the same time, as we all know, one of his major supporters who basically committed $100 million to his campaign is someone who is very much for annexation, etc. So I think there's going to be a lot of tension between doing what policy-wise is something his base wants to see, and he is, as Paul rightly said, he himself and the team around him are very pro-Israeli, but that then would undermine his broader agenda of peace in the Middle East in terms of bringing the Saudis on board and using that to kickstart a series of peace deals across the region. The normalization with Saudi Arabia, I think from the Trump team perspective, is just the first step. The idea is that once that happens, it's going to be then a domino effect. You'll have Qatar, you'll have Oman, Kuwait, and then Lebanon, kind of, I mean, in their minds, this is the sequencing. But also Syria, I mean, Ahmad al-Shara, the new ruler of Syria, has already indicated that they are willing to sign a peace deal. They don't want a fight with Israel. That is also a question mark, because today Israel is occupying almost 500 square kilometers. I believe they're about 20 kilometers away from Damascus, and news is emerging that Israel is setting up military encampments now in Syrian, it's not just the Golan occupied territories, but now in Syria itself. So there's really, it's a lot of contradictory pulls, tensions that we're going to see vis-a-vis which direction he wants to steer things in. On Iran specifically, it's interesting. I was just looking at the profile of the new, who's just been confirmed, the new Deputy Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. This is someone who considers Iran as a second-tier problem, not a first-tier problem, and someone who's criticized Israel for not allowing enough humanitarian aid into Gaza. So it's a nuanced position between the different team members. And as we know with President Trump, ultimately it's going to be about who's the last person in the room with him. And that adds to his unpredictability in a sense. I mean, like Paul, I think if it wasn't for President Trump stepping in a significant way, I think we would have still continued to see the kind of back and forth we were seeing under President Biden and his team. The bottom line is Trump scares Benjamin Netanyahu. President Trump is a cause of concern because they do not know how it's the Trump factor, the unpredictable factor. So for me, it's not clear where we're going to go. Vis-a-vis Iran, I suspect that it's very likely that we will see an attempt to negotiate with Iran short of a full-out war, coupled with an intense pressure campaign, including maybe additional sanctions, internal sabotage. We don't know. We don't know what shape that will take. Frankly, if this past year has taught us anything, it's to expect the unexpected. And it's just been such a roller coaster, including the last episode of which was the fall of the Assad regime, that I think most people either did not see coming in a sense, or at least that this collapse would happen at the speed that it did, and that the army would disappear. The other key challenge that President Trump and his administration are going to face, obviously, is what to do about Syria and what to do about the American troops across the region. President Trump in phase one had said, 4 years ago, had said that he was interested in pulling American troops out of Syria. I think they would also like to pull out of Iraq to some extent. So again, what he does there is going to have a tremendous impact, not only on in terms of the stability of the new regime, the new kid on the block in Syria, but also what happens with the Kurdish question, obviously. Also, whether Ahmad al-Shara, the new ruler in Syria, is able to steer Syria in a direction that is basically towards a transition that is inclusive, that helps move the country back in a more sustainable direction. There are many countercurrents within the country today. We all know how fractured Syria is, that there are many different forces at play, many interests at play in the country. All of this are things that President Trump and his team are going to factor as they look at how they're going to deal with Syria. But it's definitely not a given that today President Trump will simply withdraw the troops in the way he was seeking to do 4 years ago. I'll just say one last word in terms of Lebanon, where both Paul and I and Tania are at right now. Lebanon, as you know, has, again, the kind of positive start of 2025 is it's elected a new president. We have a new prime minister, and it's not just any president or not just any prime minister. The election came after a 2-year vacuum. It's the president of the army who was already the candidate 2 years ago. And from what his inaugural speech, clearly very reform-minded, wants to move the country forward. The prime minister is the former president of the ICJ, someone that we never thought we'd see someone like him as a prime minister in the country. So it's, he has a long career, also very reform-minded. So there's a lot of hope that this could actually create momentum for a very positive change in the country. But there are lots of caveats, and the role of the American administration here will be crucial. For example, one major flashpoint is what happens with the continued Israeli occupation of Lebanese land. Today, Israel, despite the ceasefire, is still occupying a chunk of Lebanese territory. The ceasefire is supposed to end on Sunday. It was a 60-day cessation of hostilities agreement, at the end of which Israel is supposed to withdraw fully from Lebanon. Up till now, it doesn't look like that is going to happen. And there are already leaks in the press that they would like to extend it and that they would like to maintain positions in certain parts of the country. 3 Hills, I think they're talking about. If that were to take place, and this is where the US administration, it's only the pressure by the United States on its ally Israel that will get Israel to leave Lebanon, obviously with a lot of other understandings. I won't go into the details, but this already, if that does not happen, it's going to place obstacles for a government that has not even yet formed. It's going to feed into the very narrative that Israel is trying to undermine, which is that there needs to be resistance against Israel, country-based resistance, which is the Hezbollah narrative. So I think this is where their role, and we're not clear yet what the position of the new administration is on this particular issue. We have to wait and see.
And so, Maha and Paul, building on that, you think that right now for the Trump administration, the fact that Hezbollah is severely weakened in Lebanon, the transit route between Iran and Hezbollah, which is Syria, is sort of saying we want closer relations with the United States. We're not ruling out. In fact, we would like a peace treaty with Israel. And the new prime minister and president need to be empowered in Lebanon, right? Finally, you have a leadership that can probably steer Lebanon out of not only the political crises, but with all due respect, the economic crisis, the sectarian issues, right? This is an opportunity, and having some stability on that southern border will help. Do you think this will factor into the Trump administration's calculations? Maybe the region is turning a corner. Maybe we should capitalize on these developments that have been dominant and prevailing over the last 20, 30 years. Do you see that calculation? And in a sense, if you have Lebanon, Syria, stable and quiet and not a transit route for Hezbollah, certainly that's going to bring a lot of comfort to the Gulf countries as well. How do you think this might play out?
Do you want me to respond or Paul?
You and then Paul. Oh, yeah.
Okay. No, I think, yes, I think they do see that as an opportunity. It was clear under President Biden And the ceasefire in Lebanon, the cessation of hostilities, the 60-day, was negotiated by the, President Biden's special envoy, Amos Hochstein, but it was done in close coordination with President Trump's team.
Right.
So it's not that President Biden is pushing in one direction and now President Trump is going to push on another, or his team. I think they do see a value in this, and this is again part of the broader weakening of Iran from their perspective. And I think there would be vested interest in maintaining stability along the Israeli Lebanese border. The bigger challenge really is the internal Israeli domestic politics. I mean, part of the reason why the Gaza conflict has continued at a horrific cost. The official number is 43,000 or 46,000, but we're already hearing that there are at least 11,000, most likely many more, many thousands more under the rubble. This was happening under the eye of everyone. No one can say they didn't know. So it's been a horrific cost, and part of the push for that, including remaining hostages for such a long period, has been the domestic calculus of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I think it's going to be the same story when it comes to Lebanon, whether he sees, if he gives up and withdraws from Lebanon fully, they will want something in return. And he's going to look at this from the domestic scene and see whether, what will be the costs and benefit analysis in terms of domestically what that would mean for him. But from, I think, the U.S. perspective, no, they see significant benefit in and actually, when you talk to administration officials, it's an accomplishment that they are quite happy with.
Excellent. Thank you, Maha. Paul, thank you so much, Maha.
No, I think Maha covered it.
So on that point, though, I just want to make sure for our viewers, this moment in history of Israel being led by a right-wing Netanyahu government, right? Netanyahu has been in power for a very long time. Gradually, his governing coalition has turned more right-wing, and we've sort of been talking about, well, what's Israel's geostrategic interest? So there's a domestic interest, which is basically about Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition, which is now very right-wing. But for the longest time, the argument has been that it's in Israel's geostrategic interest to have peace on its Lebanese border, to have peace on the Syrian border, to have peace with the Palestinians, to have peace with the Gulf. Is that the big picture missing from the calculations of not only Israel, or I don't want to say Israel because there's a lot of different heterogeneity of thought within Israel. So this is the governing coalition. And where does the President Trump's administration come in to sort of, let's say, remind Israel of its geostrategic priorities? Paul.
Yeah, well, I think it's been made very clear by Prime Minister Netanyahu and this government, and I would dare say previous governments, that, but let's just talk about this government. They are not interested in a two-state solution. They are not, hence, interested in peace with the Palestinians. If you understand by peace that there's Palestinians who have a state and Israelis who have a state and they're at peace. That is not at all the objective of the Israeli government. The Israeli government's objective does not acknowledge the right of the Palestinians or a pathway for the Palestinians to have a state. They are offering various kinds of occupation, domination, siege, subjugation status, and so on. I dare say, that the incoming Trump administration, as I said in my opening remarks, you take Mike Huckabee, the ambassador, or Witkieff, the envoy, they also are in that very sort of very dangerous position, I would say. There are those in Israel who say that's not in Israel's interest, that Israel should find a way to a two-state solution, but those have become such a small minority. They were a small minority before October 7. They've become a very small minority after October 7. The only, two contradictory elements that maybe might give a bit of hope with a small h is the influence of Donald Trump. As Maha said, Netanyahu was afraid of two ministers, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. He was afraid that if he made a deal with Hamas, they would leave the government and his government would fall. Well, it ended up that he was more afraid of Donald Trump than he was afraid of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, so he risked the deal with Gaza, and lo and behold, his government has survived. And as I said in my opening remarks, because Trump also wants a big deal with Saudi Arabia and wants to unlock these peace treaties, as Maha said, that is not only sort of a personal ambition of his, it's a geoeconomic and I would say strategic interest for the US to try to lock down the Gulf countries in an alliance with the US to keep China at bay. It's largely about China. In order to do that, Saudi Arabia has made it very clear, as I said, that they need a good governance for Gaza and a pathway for a Palestinian state. So then that's not something Israel wants, but if Trump really wants it, what kind of pressure can he put on the Netanyahu government or some other government that replaces the Netanyahu government? In order not to get too optimistic, we recall the peace plan, let's call it, which was called, he called it the deal of the century at the time, which he put on the table, or his team put on the table 5 years ago now, which offered a kind of entity for the Palestinians. It did not have obviously full sovereignty. It did not have security sovereignty and all the rest of it. And it was a group of enclaves, let's say, in the West Bank and then Gaza, which would be under very sort of specific arrangements with Israel controlling a lot of obviously the airspace security and so on. But it was a proposal. It was not something the Palestinians accepted or were willing to accept, nor was it something the bulk of the Arab countries at the time were favorable towards. Right. So I'm saying that to say that it is possible that Trump, facing this challenge between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and given that he's a very tough and ambitious guy, and he says he's a deal maker, he might put another deal on the table. It won't be the deal that Palestinians dream of, but right. The real question is, would it be something enough that some Palestinians and Saudi Arabia could potentially get behind? Very, very big question. And would it be something that any Israeli government could accept? Things are very, very difficult. They're much worse than they were a few years ago, right. But the ambitions are still there. And it's still the case that there is no solution other than some kind of two-state solution. Israel will not accept one state, will not accept Palestinians to be equal citizens in an Israeli state, which is what many Palestinians are beginning to say. Israeli Jews will not accept that, and they're not accepting a two-state solution, but this ongoing wars and ongoing occupation also doesn't work.
Thank you, Paul. Really just quick to follow up on these questions, because again, in terms of thinking about the conversations going on, people are sort of confused about what's going on. To your point, the contradictions, and Maha's point, the contradictions out there. So I've heard exactly what you're saying, which is Trump pressured Netanyahu. He's invested in this normalization agreement. That's why we saw a ceasefire. Others will say, no, the only reason Netanyahu accepted ceasefire is he was promised annexation of the West Bank. So we see that going on. But just to list a few other things, Saudi Arabia says they want to see a pathway to statehood. Well, what is that going to be, like another Oslo outline that doesn't have much teeth moving forward, or are they asking for statehood? Third, well, what about Palestinian governance? People will say, well, yeah, everybody wants there to be some sort of Palestinian state or something different than what we have now, but the Palestinians still don't have their act together. And now, given the fact that Hamas is clearly very dominant still in Gaza, what does this mean for future Palestinian governance? And at some point, will the Saudis, and then this goes for you and Maha, will this, if these things are not playing out right, do you see the Saudis abandoning the Palestinian question and moving forward on normalization? Because in the end of the day, the Gulf also is worried about Iran. and maybe the ascendance of, the China issue, there's some contradictions there. We've seen Saudi Arabia warm up to China, but nevertheless, it's still very much a strong U.S. ally. Is there a scenario where the Saudis will abandon the Palestinian cause and move forward on normalization? I mean, that's a lot, but I know just in terms of what dinner conversations sometimes look like, these are the questions that everybody's asking. So we can go back to Paul and then Maha with these questions.
Well, I mean, quick reactions, if I can remember all of your questions. The deal that Trump might put on the table, to be very clear, includes annexation, as it did include annexation in 2020. In other words, his position, which is very public, is yes, Israel will go ahead and annex all or almost all of the settlements that they've built on the West Bank, but the Palestinians will get from what's left, which is not an enormous amount, but that was roughly the outlines of his proposal, that they will get a kind of statehood. It's not full statehood. They will get it on those parts of the West Bank as well as in Gaza. So yes, sadly, it includes the annexation aspect. On Saudi Arabia and the issue of pathway and what will they do, that's a very good question. I mean, obviously, we cannot predict, what the Saudi position might be 3 years from now.
Right.
But to be true to what their position actually is, it is no, they will not do normalization without a what do they call it? An irreversible pathway to a Palestinian state. Of course, that could mean a lot of things, but it's already much, much more than what the Israeli government is even willing to talk about. The Israeli government is not even willing to say the words Palestinian state. So realistically, Israel is still very far away from anything Saudi Arabia could accept. And the test will be, first of all, in Gaza. If indeed there is a lasting ceasefire in Gaza, then what is the post-war situation like? Who will be the governance structure? Will the Palestinian Authority be allowed back in? All of that, so far, Israel has said no, no, no.
Right.
And also, what will the Israeli developments on the West Bank be? There now is an escalation of activity on the West Bank. Things getting quiet maybe in Gaza will get worse on the West Bank. On the issue of what was the third issue? The Palestinian Authority itself.
Yeah.
The Palestinians, as well as the Arab states, are aware that the Palestinian Authority needs reform, that it needs many, many things. Some changes have already been implemented. So that is not being ignored, and that is acknowledged. And if there is an opening by Israel to allow the Palestinian Authority to actually play a role in Gaza, then there will be a lot of momentum to help the Palestinian Authority or leverage the Palestinian Authority to do more reform and to be better as it re-enters Gaza. But right now, Israel says that's out of the question. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul. Maha, with these questions.
Okay, I mean, Paul covered pretty much most of it. I'll just add two things maybe. One is that I agree very much with the assessment that it would be very difficult for Saudi Arabia to move ahead with any kind of normalization if there isn't some sort of a promise of a political horizon for the Palestinians, something obviously that this particular government, Israeli government, and quite frankly, the broader Israeli mood, public mood is not for. They're not supportive of. So it's both. I mean, we focus on the Israeli government per se, but we've seen in the polls that have been coming out over the past year in Israel is that the public is not that far off in that sense, in terms of the what has happened in Gaza, etc. So, and the position vis-a-vis Palestinian statehood. In Israel today, the predominant narrative is the right wing, or the more right wing narrative in that sense. So that's one. I think a lot of it will depend on the implementation of the ceasefire itself now, phase 1, phase 2. I think the Trump administration needs to be ready for Benjamin Netanyahu to try and scuttle the deal as he has done for the past year and a half. And then blame it on Hamas. And I think this is something that everybody is very wary of. He would in his current government would not like to see any kind of discussion of what a day after scenario could look like in Gaza. They've resisted it for the past year and a half, and there continues to be a significant resistance to that conversation, because then that leads to a conversation around a political horizon, let's put it this way. The only things we've been hearing in the last few days is if there is reconstruction, apparently they're now considering moving some Palestinians to Indonesia while they are doing this reconstruction. So the project of ethnic transfer of Palestinians from Gaza is still very much there as well. And I think this is something we need to keep our eyes on. I concur that he's not going to stop the settlements at all. I mean, his own base, President Trump's own base, is pro-settlements. So while he may curb the more war instincts of this current government, i.e., stop the guns, but he definitely will not be curbing settlements. We've seen him withdraw from the United Nations. Well, he's frozen all ODA. President Trump has frozen all overseas development aid. For the moment, I don't know whether they will go back and stop support for UNRWA. He's already withdrawn from WHO, the ICJ, the ICC. I mean, all of this began under the Biden administration. And I think with President Trump, we may see more actions taken on this front. So it's, again, something we need to keep our eye on in that sense. There was a second point I wanted to make, but now it slipped my mind. I'll come back to it.
Maybe the question about, will Saudi Arabia move ahead without the Palestinian state? You said, you didn't think so.
I genuinely don't. I think that was my point. I think it's become incredibly difficult for Saudi Arabia to do this. The amount of blood that has been shed, the brutality that we've seen in Gaza over the past year and a half, and it's on every TV screen. It's on every mobile, not even TV screens. It's on every mobile. So the blatant flaunting of international laws, war crime. I mean, we've seen it. It's happening under our eyes. So it's become incredibly, the public mood in the region is there's a lot of anger. And not surprisingly, Hamas's popularity, not just within Gaza or amongst the Palestinians, but far beyond, has also increased. And I think this is something the Saudis and other countries in the region are going to keep their eye on. The Israelis are already admitting that Hamas's recruitment has shot up, in part because of its own military actions in Gaza. So I think this is something that also the Gulf countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, are going to be very sensitive to, again, as we move forward on this. So no, I don't see them moving ahead without some sort of a promise or a commitment to a political horizon. It may not be the two-state solution. Frankly, Palestinian and Israelis today are living in a one-state reality. It's no more a two-state solution. It is a one-state reality. So unless there's some commitment on, it won't be to a two-state solution, but at least to a political horizon, whatever that means, they won't move. I think they won't move. It'll be very difficult for them to move on that front.
So on that point, I'm turning to some questions, and I know we're about 13 minutes out. This has been such a rich and fascinating conversation, discussion. Thank you so much. So the first question is, on the Trump administration and its commitment to settlements, some argue that, the Biden administration, although its rhetoric was anti-settlement, it was very much a pro-settlement administration. How would you respond to that? I mean, not only Biden, to be fair, let's go back to also Obama. Their rhetoric was very much anti-settlements, anti-expansion into the West Bank, but in the end of the day, settlements continued under both Democratic administrations. So are we painting the Trump presidency in a different light here?
I think we'll see settlements accelerate further. I don't think we're painting them in a different light. Absolutely, whoever asked this question is absolutely right. Settlements have been ongoing, but particularly perhaps under Obama more than under President Trump, they were moving ahead, but at a relatively smaller pace. What is worrisome now is we might see an acceleration, not because settlements building on steroids, but also we're seeing, we already saw this under President Biden, the intensification of settler attacks against Palestinians and the uprooting of Palestinian communities from across the West Bank. And this is also something that I think we might see more of as we move into the Trump presidency. There'll be more leniency on that front.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
let me add, if I may, Amaney.
Oh, sorry, Paul. Go
Yeah.
ahead, please.
Yeah, this has been, U.S. administrations ever since basically Camp David Accords most of them have spoken against. Both Republican and Democratic administrations before the Trump administration spoke against the settlements, but nothing was ever done to back that up. And Israel proceeded with its settlement policy throughout all the administrations of the last 40 years. As you saw when, Netanyahu comes to Congress, he gets a much bigger reception than any U.S. president. So you can see that, Israel does get its way. But a very important difference between Trump even and Biden is the legitimacy or legitimization issue. That Trump, Biden and Democratic and previous Republican administrations would say we're against it, it's against the law. This applied, so they didn't legitimize them. They didn't recognize the occupation of the Golan Heights. They didn't move the embassy to Jerusalem. Whereas Trump has a completely different approach, which is, okay, this is the reality. He's good with it. He's going to legitimize it, at least from the U.S. side. Recognized the occupation of the Golan Heights. He was about to recognize the annexation of the settlements on the West Bank before the Abraham Accords deal was made. Him and his base, yes, they want to make these things legitimate in U.S. eyes and U.S. law. That is different from how, and maybe you can say at least it's more honest. They're saying it. They're being more clear about it.
Right.
That's all I'll say.
So we have another question, Paul, to you and to Maha about. I think both you and Maha mentioned that for the Trump administration, it's going to matter who President Trump is listening to. How does Massad Boulos, Tiffany's father-in-law, figure in all of this right now? So maybe start with Paul and then Maha.
Well, let me take that question because he's from my part of the country. He's from the Qudha district. I know him fairly well. And he is, through his son, now kind of a family member of Trump. And with President Trump, family matters, and that's part of his political life. I do think it is and will be significant, particularly as relates to Lebanon, and to know that President Trump has a Lebanese in his family. So Lebanon is not some vague, concept. It's a country. His daughter is married to one of their nationals. Massad Boulos is one of his advisors. So I'm saying it might not necessarily have a big impact on geopolitics and his policy towards the Middle East. Definitely his other advisors are, the ones who will be much more influential on Israel and Palestine and Iran probably. But I will single out the Lebanon question, and Maha and I are currently in Lebanon right now, and Massad is from Lebanon. So I do think it will make a positive difference, and I'm glad that Massad Boulos is part of his inner circle, so that when Lebanon questions come up, it's not just, this political perspective or that security issue. There's a country there, there's people, they have ambitions, they have, goals. And as Maha indicated, this is a particularly hopeful moment for Lebanon, where we have a new president, a new prime minister, the Assad regime is gone, there's new opportunities, and hence this could be a moment where Lebanon regains its sovereignty and really goes on a very positive trajectory. To do that, it will certainly need support and help from the US and from Gulf countries and other friends of Lebanon.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Maha, on that question.
Paul pretty much covered it. I concur with everything he said.
Excellent. Okay, so I guess one last question. One of the areas that we didn't mention and it has been in the news also is Yemen. What do you see in terms of President Trump's policies, maybe vis-a-vis Yemen, the Houthis, all of that? And like in the last, yeah, we have a few minutes here. Sorry. Maybe Maha and then Paul.
I mean, again, it's from where I'm sitting, it's difficult to determine. I mean, President Trump is going to be a kind of a, this box of magic tricks. You open it up and you don't quite know what to expect sometimes. I think vis-a-vis Yemen, we might see a tougher stance in the parlance around the Houthis. They're renegades. They've been sending rockets and missiles to Israel. So they're an arm of Iran, etc. That's the narrative around them. So we may see a more pressure on the Houthis in Yemen by the US, more bombing, greater or larger scope of bombing campaigns, as part and parcel of a pressure mechanism to get them to some sort of a peace treaty. Honestly, I think this administration is coming in with the grand ambition of shutting down all the different conflicts in the region. What is worrisome is how these are going to be shut down, because as we know, if they're shut down in a way that does not address some of the underlying factors that triggered these conflicts, and they're not all international. Many of these conflicts are triggered by domestic situations. So if there is no attempt to address all of this, we'll just see, calming down for a few years, and then things erupt again. The other point I'd like to make away from Yemen, which no one has brought up, is the question of reconstruction. Okay. We are looking at a region where the reconstruction needs are huge, whether it's Gaza, whether it's Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, Iraq. I mean, they're massive. So again, if reconstruction is seen as part of this broader stabilization agenda and not as an opportunity to create a durable peace, then again, we'll rebuild, as has happened in Gaza so many times. You rebuild for a few years, and then it all gets smashed again.
Thank you, Maha, for that. Paul, I guess that's a good point where to leave off. Like a lot of reconstruction is needed in the region. I suppose I'm going to ask the basic question: who's going to pay for all this reconstruction? And is this an opportunity to fold these reconstruction plans into durable peace treaties, so we're not here again in 5-10 years? Do you think the Trump administration has that vision in sight?
Well, no, I don't think the Trump administration is interested in reconstruction. They're interested in business, investment, profit, seeking advantage. I think President Trump made that very clear in his inauguration. Secretary Marco Rubio made it very clear. They're not in the business of building other people's countries, even if, they might have had a hand in some of the conflicts. But let me take a step back and to say, before one can talk about reconstruction, obviously, you need an end to the conflict and a context wherein at least the conversation of reconstruction can begin. And each case is different. Gaza has its own very, special conditions. What will Israel agree to? Can the PA come back? And if so, then you can begin to talk about some reconstruction. Syria, huge, question mark, but maybe there the pathway is a bit clearer. Because the sanctions that were put on Syria were put against the Assad regime. The Assad regime is now gone. Okay, there's some important question marks about HTS and the new leadership in Syria. But if they, proceed in a positive way and in an inclusive way, one can definitely see a pathway to lifting of sanctions on Israel. And there are many countries, many of them in the region, who want to invest in Syria, who want to get in to sort of the rebuilding and revival of Syria. Lebanon is a separate question. How is the south and the southern suburbs? And that also has not yet fully been resolved politically. I will definitely say there is not enough money in the region or available internationally to do all of this reconstruction. It's just not there, and it's not going to come. And the Gulf itself is now interested in investment, not grants and just straight reconstruction. So for all of these countries, it's going to be a 20-year process. This is going to be, I mean, at least for the big ones like Syria and Gaza, there isn't money waiting there and you flip a switch and here's 80 billion, here's 60 billion, it doesn't exist. Europe doesn't have it. The Gulf has a lot of it, but is not willing to give it away. China has money, but doesn't give it away. US has money, but doesn't give it away. So it's going to be a long process. But I know we're coming to an end. So on my part, I want to thank you, Amaney, and thank both Princeton and AUB for this opportunity. And it's always a pleasure to be with my colleague, Maha Yahya.
Thank you, Amaney. Ditto on Paul and Tania, AUB, Princeton, and look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul and Maha. This has been an amazing conversation, discussion. I just want to say a word about the AUB, the American University of Beirut, BOPE Center at Princeton Collaborative Initiative. It really was the brainchild of Mamdouha Bopst, who's of Lebanese descent. We're fortunate that her niece, Randa Hafad, who sort of spearheaded this project forward, as well as with us on the webinar. So a shout out to her and the family for making these type of conversations and discussions possible. We've benefited tremendously from your insights and your expertise, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. I want to thank Tania Haddad again for introducing the panel and all the colleagues behind the scenes who made this possible. With that, thank you so much, and we look forward to our next installment. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.